The Zephyrian Grand Assembly Hall buzzed with the kind of self-important energy that only comes from beings who have convinced themselves that superior technology equals superior intelligence, which, as any human could tell you, is roughly equivalent to believing that owning a Ferrari makes you a good driver. But then again, humans weren't exactly known for their diplomatic restraint in pointing out such logical fallacies. Commander Vexthul of the Vorthak Collective stood at the center of the crystalline amphitheater, his forearms gesticulating with the practiced grace of someone who had delivered this same speech to 17 different planetary systems. The invasion protocol was simple, really. Show up, demand surrender, catalog the local species' pathetic defense strategies for the archives, then proceed with systematic conquest. It was all very civilized, in that particular way that advanced civilizations used the word civilized to describe their more efficient methods of brutality. The Tribunal recognizes the defendant species designation Homo sapiens, Vexthul announced, his translator rendering the Latin with the kind of disdain usually reserved for discussing particularly unimpressive mold specimens. Planet of origin, Sol 3, commonly referred to as Earth. Technological classification, barely post-nuclear. Threat assessment, negligible. The assembled representatives from across the galaxy, a who's who of species that had long since forgotten what it felt like to be the underdog, settled back in their various forms of seating arrangements. Some had tentacles that curled with anticipation, others had probability organs that were already calculating casualty ratios, and a few had evolved past the need for physical forms entirely, and simply existed as smug clouds of intellectual superiority. From the defendant's podium, Dr. Miranda Chen stepped forward. She was human, which meant she looked exactly like what every other species in the galaxy considered to be an evolutionary joke. Bipedal, soft-skinned, ridiculously fragile, and possessed of only one heart, one brain, and a disturbing tendency to make decisions based on something called feelings. Her credentials listed her as Earth's chief defense coordinator, which was roughly equivalent to being the head of a military force that still used chemical propulsion and hadn't even figured out faster-than-light communication. Honored Tribunal, Chen began, her voice carrying that particular human quality that somehow managed to sound both respectful and utterly unimpressed at the same time. Humanity appreciates this opportunity to present our defensive strategy. A ripple of what might charitably be called laughter, if laughter could be translated across 17 different evolutionary paths, swept through the assembly. The Keltorian representative, a being that looked like someone had given a jellyfish both delusions of grandeur and access to advanced technology, practically vibrated with amusement. Defensive strategy? Vexthul's voice carried the kind of polite incredulity that parents use when their toddler announces they've invented a new form of mathematics. Your species has been observed for the standard evaluation period. Your most advanced weapons are barely capable of planetary surface bombardment. Your space-based defenses consist of, let me check the files, surveillance satellites and what you call a space station that appears to be held together with what our analysts can only describe as hope and duct tape. The Crystalline Collective's representative, a being that existed as a living geometric equation, pulsed with colors that translated roughly to condescending mathematical certainty. It had run the numbers naturally. Earth's defensive capabilities rated somewhere between quaint and adorable on the Galactic Threat Assessment Scale. Dr. Chen nodded with the kind of earnest gravity that immediately made every advanced species in the room question whether humans had even understood the situation they were in. Yes, our technological approach differs from galactic standards. Our defensive strategy is based on what we call the Terran Chaos Protocol. Chaos Protocol? Vexthul's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, which was his species' equivalent of trying to process information that refused to make sense. That's not how protocols work. By definition, protocols are organized systems of... We've weaponized unpredictability, Chen continued, as if she hadn't just suggested that her species had somehow turned a fundamental breakdown of logical planning into a military asset. Our defense relies on the principle that advanced civilizations, having achieved efficiency and logical supremacy, have also developed certain blind spots. The assembled representatives exchanged the galactic equivalent of meaningful looks. Here was a species so primitive that they were apparently trying to defend themselves with the absence of a plan. It was like watching someone attempt to stop a supernova with a strongly worded letter. The hive mind of Sector 7, a collective consciousness that had evolved past individual thought and achieved perfect tactical coordination, broadcast its assessment directly into the room's translation matrix. Classification confirmed. Delusional primitive response to overwhelming technological superiority. Recommended response, gentle correction, followed by standard assimilation protocols. Perhaps, Vextall said with the kind of patience that indicated he was beginning to feel genuinely sorry for humanity, you could elaborate on these tactics? Dr. Chen smiled. It was a distinctly human expression that somehow managed to convey both warmth and something that made several psychic species in the room suddenly feel like they were missing some crucial piece of information. Our primary defensive strategy involves what we term aggressive illogical behavior. When faced with superior force, humans have a documented tendency to respond in ways that defy tactical prediction models. We've simply systematized this approach. You've systematized being illogical. The translator was beginning to struggle with concepts that violated basic principles of strategic planning. We prefer to think of it as tactical creativity. Our war games have shown that even our most advanced AI systems can't accurately predict human behavior in combat situations longer than 14 minutes. We expect this limitation to be significantly more pronounced when dealing with civilizations that have optimized for logical efficiency. The silence that followed was the kind of silence that occurs when an entire room full of the galaxy's most advanced minds simultaneously tries to process information that refuses to fit into any known category of military strategy. It was like watching a room full of chess grandmasters being told that their opponent intended to win by eating the pieces. The Vorthak Collective had built their entire military doctrine around predictive modeling. Their invasion fleets were coordinated through quantum-length strategic AI that could calculate optimal battle outcomes 17 layers deep. Their weapon systems were automated to respond to threat patterns with microsecond precision. Their entire approach to warfare was based on the fundamental assumption that military conflict was, at its core, a mathematics problem with optimal solutions. I see, Vextall finally managed, though his tone suggested he very clearly did not see at all. And this, creative chaos, this is your entire defensive strategy? Oh no, Dr. Chen said, her smile widening in a way that somehow made the room's temperature feel like it had dropped several degrees. That's just phase 1. Phase 2 involves what we call emotional warfare. Emotional warfare. The concept was so alien to the assembled representatives that several species' translation matrices simply gave up and started displaying error messages. Humans have what other species might consider to be an evolutionary flaw. We form powerful emotional attachments to abstract concepts like home, freedom, and the right to exist, without being invaded by smug aliens. These emotions tend to override logical risk assessment protocols. The crystalline collective's representative flickered through several spectrums of light that roughly translated to system error does not compute. When humans experience what we term righteous anger, our tactical behavior becomes exponentially less predictable. We have historical documentation of human military units achieving strategic objectives that were mathematically impossible. Our psychologists theorized that emotional investment actually enhances human tactical creativity rather than limiting it. The hive mind of Sector 7 attempted to process this information through its collective analytical matrix, and promptly experienced what could only be described as the galactic equivalent of a headache. The concept of emotions improving tactical performance violated approximately 14,000 years of evolutionary military doctrine. Phase 3, Dr. Chen continued, apparently oblivious to the fact that she was describing what amounted to a military strategy based on controlled insanity, involves cultural weaponization. Humans have a peculiar tendency to treat warfare as another form of artistic expression. We have individuals who specialize in what we call tactical improvisation, essentially making up strategies during active combat situations. Vexthal's forearms began to gesture in patterns that his species used to indicate extreme cognitive distress. You're describing military leadership based on spontaneous creativity? We prefer to think of it as adapted resource utilization. Humans have a documented history of achieving victory through the strategic application of whatever happens to be available at the moment, regardless of whether those resources were actually designed for military use. The tribunal chamber had gone quiet, in the way that large spaces go quiet when everyone present is simultaneously questioning their understanding of fundamental reality. Several species were running emergency diagnostics on their translation systems, convinced that something had gone catastrophically wrong with the linguistic processing. "I think," Vexthal said slowly, "there may be some misunderstanding here. You're describing your defensive strategy as organized chaos, guided by emotions, implemented through improvisation. You've grasped the essential elements, yes. And you believe this approach will be effective against a fleet equipped with quantum-coherent weapons systems, predictive AI battle coordination, and tactical doctrine refined through successful conquest of 47 star systems?" Dr. Chen's smile took on a quality that made every precognitive species in the room suddenly develop the unsettling feeling that they were missing something very important about the immediate future. "We believe it will be educational for everyone involved." 3 standard galactic hours later, the Vorthak invasion fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of Earth's solar system, with all the confidence of a species that had spent the intervening time running detailed tactical analyses of humanity's defense strategy, and concluding that what they were facing was less a military challenge and more an opportunity for advanced studies in primitive psychology. Admiral Krexvol, commanding the flagship Inevitable Victory, stood before his tactical display with the satisfied expression of someone about to solve a particularly simple equation. His strategic AI had processed humanity's described defensive approach and determined that the optimal response was to simply ignore it. Chaos, after all, was just another word for inefficient, and emotions were simply evolutionary artifacts that interfered with logical decision-making. "Fleet status, Commander." "All ships report ready, Admiral. Our tactical AI calculates a 99.97% probability of complete victory within 4 standard hours. The remaining 0.03% accounts for the possibility that the humans might surrender faster than our models predict." The fleet was impressive, even by galactic standards. 200 vessels of various sizes, from massive dreadnoughts that could crack continents to specialized fighters designed for atmospheric superiority. The Vorthak Collective's military doctrine was based on overwhelming technological superiority. Hit hard, hit fast, and leave absolutely nothing to chance. "Long-range sensors detect minimal defensive activity," the ship's tactical coordinator reported. "Several small orbital installations, some primitive communication satellites, and what appears to be, Admiral, are those humans launching balloons into their upper atmosphere?" Admiral Krexvol examined the sensor data with the kind of professional interest that military commanders develop when observing inexplicable enemy behavior. The objects were indeed balloons, large ones, filled with helium, carrying payloads that their sensors couldn't quite identify. "Weather monitoring equipment, most likely," he concluded. "Primitive species often resort to atmospheric measurement during crisis situations. It probably makes them feel like they're doing something useful." What the Vorthak sensors couldn't detect, because they were calibrated to identify known forms of military technology, was that each balloon carried a payload of what humans had euphemistically termed cultural communication devices. These were essentially speakers, powerful enough to broadcast across radio frequencies, loaded with carefully selected samples of human music, literature, and what Earth's military psychologists had classified as maximally confusing cultural artifacts. The concept was simple. If you're facing an enemy whose entire strategic doctrine is based on logical prediction, the optimal response is to provide them with information that actively defeats logical analysis. The balloon payloads were broadcasting everything from death metal to children's nursery rhymes, from Shakespeare to internet memes, from classical symphonies to recordings of humans arguing about whether hot dogs were sandwiches. The Vorthak fleet's communication systems, designed to automatically monitor and analyze enemy transmissions, began receiving this data and attempting to process it through their tactical assessment protocols. The results were Admiral, the communications officer reported, his voice carrying the particular strain that comes from trying to translate concepts that refuse to make sense. We're receiving enemy transmissions, but our analysis systems are struggling with the content. Elaborate. Well, sir, we're receiving what appears to be a human audio recording of something called "Never Gonna Give You Up," followed immediately by a dramatic recitation of Hamlet's soliloquy, followed by what our translation matrix identifies as "Recipe for Chocolate Chip Cookies the Musical." Admiral Krexvoll stared at his communications officer for several seconds. That's their military communication protocol? It appears to be, sir. Our tactical AI is attempting to identify strategic meaning in the transmissions, but the analytical algorithms keep producing error messages. The system is convinced that the data contains included military intelligence, but can't determine what that intelligence might be. This was precisely the problem that Earth's strategic planners had anticipated. The Vorthak Collective's technology was so advanced, so perfectly designed for logical efficiency, that it couldn't simply ignore apparently meaningless data. Their systems were programmed to assume that any communication from an enemy source must contain tactical intelligence, which meant they were now dedicating enormous computational resources to analyzing the deeper, strategic implications of knock-knock jokes and cat videos. "Sir," the tactical coordinator announced, "our predictive combat AI is requesting additional processing time. It's attempting to model human behavioral patterns based on the cultural data, but the analysis matrix keeps crashing. The system has identified 17 different logical contradictions in the dataset. Apparently humans have cultural artifacts that simultaneously glorify both violence and peace, celebrate both conformity and rebellion, and express both deep philosophical wisdom and what the translator can only render as aggressive nonsense." The inevitable victories AI, faced with trying to develop a tactical model for a species that had somehow weaponized cognitive dissonance, was beginning to experience the digital equivalent of an existential crisis. "Shall we proceed with the attack, Admiral?" Admiral Krexvoll considered his options. The humans' cultural weaponization was clearly some form of primitive psychological warfare designed to confuse his tactical systems. The logical response was to ignore the clearly meaningless data and proceed with standard invasion protocols. "Launch first wave, all fighters, advance to atmospheric entry position." The Vorthak fighter wing, 96 vessels equipped with plasma weaponry and adaptive tactical AI, accelerated toward Earth's atmosphere with practiced precision. Their approach vectors were calculated for maximum efficiency. Their targeting systems were optimized for terrestrial defensive installations, and their pilots were confident in the superiority of their technology. What they encountered as they entered Earth's atmosphere was not exactly what their tactical manuals had prepared them for. The first sign that something was amiss came when Earth's defensive installations began broadcasting what the Vorthak tactical computers identified as non-threatening communication attempts. Instead of weapons fire or electronic countermeasures, the approaching fighters were suddenly receiving enthusiastic greetings in 47 different human languages, accompanied by cheerful offers of cultural exchange and invitations to visit local tourist attractions. "Flight leader," one of the pilots reported, "I'm receiving, are these humans trying to give us restaurant recommendations?" "Confirm, Flight 3, my tactical display is showing optimal routes to something called pizza places and museums of cultural interest." The Vorthak pilots, trained for swift and decisive military action, found themselves in the unprecedented situation of being welcomed to Earth by enemies who seemed more interested in sharing food recommendations than engaging in combat. Their tactical AI, programmed to identify and respond to threat patterns, was struggling to classify behavior that fell somewhere between hospitality and incomprehensible strategic deception. Then the humans activated Phase 2 of their defense plan. Earth's orbital installations, those primitive satellites that the Vorthak had dismissed as surveillance equipment, suddenly began broadcasting something that defied every known principle of military communication. Instead of tactical data or weapons targeting, they were transmitting what could only be described as aggressive friendship. Every human on Earth with access to communication technology had been mobilized into what their military strategists had termed Operation Overwhelming Niceness. The orbital network was channeling millions of simultaneous messages from humans who were genuinely, enthusiastically interested in learning about Vorthak culture, asking about their families, inquiring about their hobbies, and expressing sincere concern for their well-being. And deeper. "Flight leader," another pilot reported, his voice carrying the particular strain that comes from trying to process information that violates basic assumptions about reality. "I'm receiving individual messages from thousands of humans. They're asking about my health, my family, whether I've tried their local cuisine, and whether I'd like to exchange contact information for future cultural dialogue." The Vorthak military doctrine had prepared for many scenarios: desperate last stands, sophisticated electronic warfare, advanced defensive technology, even psychological manipulation through fear and intimidation. What it had not prepared for was an enemy that responded to invasion by expressing genuine curiosity about the invaders' personal lives and offering to share family recipes. "Flight leader," the tactical coordinator's voice came through the communication system. "Our combat AI is reporting system conflicts. The targeting algorithms are having difficulty classifying entities that are simultaneously designated as enemy combatants and friendly cultural ambassadors." This was the second layer of humanity's defensive strategy. Earth psychologists had theorized that advanced military civilizations, having optimized their societies for efficient conquest, had likely evolved past the kind of personal, individual connections that humans considered normal. The Vorthak Collective's military personnel were probably accustomed to dealing with enemies as abstract tactical problems, not as individuals who wanted to know about their childhood pets and favorite colors. The cognitive dissonance was extraordinary. Here were trained military professionals equipped with advanced weapon systems being asked by their designated enemies whether they preferred coffee or tea, and would they like to see pictures of human children's artwork. "Sir," Flight 3 reported, "one of the humans has sent me a handmade digital greeting card. It says, 'Welcome to Earth,' and appears to be decorated with animated sparkles and what the translator identifies as emoticons representing friendship." Admiral Krexvoll, monitoring the situation from the flagship, felt the first stirrings of something that the Vorthak language didn't have a specific word for, but humans would have immediately recognized as profound confusion, mixed with the uncomfortable realization that one's assumptions about reality might be fundamentally flawed. "Tactical assessment, Commander." "Sir, our combat effectiveness models are experiencing difficulties. The targeting systems are designed to identify and engage hostile forces, but our sensor data indicates that Earth's population is simultaneously engaging in defensive preparation and welcoming committee activities." The humans had somehow managed to weaponize hospitality. Their defense consisted of being so aggressively friendly that the Vorthak military AI couldn't process them as actual enemies. It was like trying to conduct a military operation against opponents who kept interrupting battle planning sessions to offer refreshments and asked whether anyone needed directions to the bathroom. "Proceed with landing operations," Admiral Krexvoll ordered, though his voice carried the particular uncertainty that comes from giving orders in situations that don't match any known tactical paradigm. The first wave of Vorthak ground forces descended toward Earth's major population centers, their landing craft equipped with standard pacification technology and their personnel briefed on efficient occupation protocols. What they found upon landing was not exactly what their training had prepared them for. The humans were waiting for them certainly, but instead of fortified defensive positions or desperate civilian evacuation, the Vorthak forces found themselves facing reception committees. The landing site outside New York City was decorated with what appeared to be welcome banners in the Vorthak language, though the translation was rather endearingly incorrect, reading roughly, "Greetings, honored space visitors. We hope you like our planet. Please try the local food." Tables had been set up with what humans optimistically called cultural exchange materials: books, music, arts supplies, and an impressive variety of snack foods. Squad leader, one of the Vorthak soldiers, reported, "The enemy civilians are approaching our position, but they're not armed. They appear to be carrying... Are those gift baskets?" Squad leader Vextan examined the situation through his tactical visor. The humans were indeed approaching, but their behavior matched no known pattern of civilian response to military occupation. Instead of fear, panic, or organized resistance, they seemed excited, enthusiastic. Several were carrying signs that read, "Welcome to Earth," and "We're so happy to meet you," in carefully researched Vorthak script. "Confirm threat assessment," Vexton ordered. Though he was beginning to suspect that his tactical systems weren't equipped to assess threats that came in the form of homemade cookies and enthusiastic invitations to cultural dialogue. A young human female approached the landing zone, completely ignoring the advanced military hardware surrounding her and the armed soldiers who were supposedly intimidating enough to pacify entire planetary populations. She was carrying what appeared to be a plate of baked goods and wearing an expression of such genuine joy that several Vorthak soldiers found themselves checking their threat assessment systems for malfunction indicators. "Hi," she called out, her voice carrying the kind of uncomplicated happiness that the Vorthak military had never encountered in a combat situation. "Welcome to Earth. I'm Jennifer, and I brought cookies. They're chocolate chip. I hope that's okay. Do you guys have any dietary restrictions we should know about?" Squad leader Vextan stared at the approaching human through his tactical display, watching as his threat assessment system attempted to process an entity that was simultaneously classified as enemy civilian and enthusiastic host offering food. The cognitive dissonance was beginning to affect his training protocols. "Squad leader," another soldier reported, "more humans are approaching our perimeter, but they're carrying flowers and what appears to be handmade welcome signs. And is that a cake?" This was the moment that Earth's defense strategists had calculated would be the crucial inflection point. Humanity's entire plan was based on the theory that advanced military civilizations, having optimized their societies for efficient conquest, had probably evolved past the kind of spontaneous, individual kindness that humans considered normal. Faced with genuine warmth and hospitality from people they were supposed to be conquering, the psychological impact on professional military personnel would be significant. The Vorthak soldiers found themselves in the unprecedented situation of being offered refreshments by the people they were supposed to be intimidating into submission. Their training had covered resistance, desperation, fear, anger, and strategic deception. It had not covered enthusiastic hospitality from enemies who seemed genuinely excited to learn about Vorthak culture and share their own traditions. "Squad leader," the communications specialist reported, "I'm receiving requests from human civilians asking whether they can show us around their city, introduce us to their families, and teach us how to play something called board games." The Vorthak military's entire tactical doctrine was beginning to unravel under the assault of unconditional friendliness. Their weapons systems were calibrated for hostile targets, their psychological warfare protocols were designed to exploit fear and desperation, and their occupation procedures assumed a population that would respond to superior force with submission or resistance. None of their training had prepared them for enemies who responded to invasion by offering to share family photos and asking whether anyone wanted to learn how to make pizza. Back on the flagship, Admiral Krexvoll was discovering that commanding an invasion fleet was significantly more complicated when the people being invaded kept asking whether the invaders needed anything and offering to help make them more comfortable during their stay. "Status report all units," he commanded, though his voice carried a note of uncertainty that his bridge crew had never heard before. "Landing Zone Alpha reports successful establishment of perimeter, but requests guidance on protocol for civilians offering cultural gifts and asking about our hobbies. Landing Zone Beta has encountered Organized welcome activities. The humans have apparently prepared what they call friendship ceremonies and are requesting permission to demonstrate local music and dance traditions. Landing Zone Gamma reports that local civilians have established what appears to be an impromptu educational exchange program. They're asking whether we'd like to participate in something called Show and Tell, where we share information about our technology in exchange for learning about human art and literature. Admiral Krexvol felt something that the Vorthak language had no specific term for, but that humans would recognize as the particular kind of existential confusion that comes from having one's fundamental assumptions about reality challenged by evidence that refuses to fit any known category. "Sir," his tactical coordinator reported, "our strategic AI is experiencing what appears to be recursive logic conflicts. The system is attempting to process enemy behavior that simultaneously qualifies as resistance to occupation and aggressive hospitality, and the analytical algorithms are producing contradictory results." The Vorthak Collective's military technology, evolved through successful conquest of 47 star systems, was designed to handle every known form of resistance. It could adapt to guerrilla warfare, counter advanced defensive systems, and respond to sophisticated psychological operations. What it couldn't handle was an enemy that treated invasion as an opportunity for intercultural friendship. "Sir," the communications officer announced, "we're receiving a transmission from the human leadership. They're requesting a formal meeting to discuss mutual cultural enrichment opportunities and asking whether we'd like to participate in what they call diplomatic dinner parties." Diplomatic dinner parties? The transmission includes detailed information about human food preparation, suggestions for cultural exchange activities, and, "Sir, they've sent us a compilation of what they call fun facts about Earth, including statistical data about biodiversity, recreational activities, and local tourist attractions." This was Phase 3 of humanity's defense plan, and it was working exactly as Earth strategists had predicted. The human response to invasion was so fundamentally different from anything the Vorthak had encountered that their entire military doctrine was becoming irrelevant. How do you conquer a species that responds to superior force by offering to teach you their languages and share their favorite recipes? "Sir," the tactical coordinator continued, "our occupation protocols are designed for populations that respond to conquest with either submission or resistance. Our systems don't have procedures for populations that respond to conquest with enthusiasm for cultural exchange." Admiral Krexvol stood before his tactical display, watching as his perfectly planned invasion devolved into what appeared to be the galaxy's most heavily armed diplomatic reception. His ground forces were receiving guided tours of human cities, his pilots were being invited to community events, and his command staff was receiving earnest inquiries about whether they'd like to learn human sports or participate in artistic collaboration projects. The final phase of humanity's defense plan activated when Earth's leadership transmitted their formal response to the Vorthak Collective's invasion. Instead of surrender or defiance, humanity offered something that no species in galactic history had ever offered to their conquerors: genuine partnership. "People of the Vorthak Collective," the message began, broadcast directly to every ship in the invasion fleet. "We understand that your civilization has achieved remarkable technological advancement, and we are honored by your visit to our world. Rather than viewing this encounter as a conquest, we would like to propose something unprecedented, a true partnership between our species, based on mutual respect, shared knowledge, and the recognition that both our civilizations have unique contributions to make to the galaxy." The message continued with detailed proposals for technological exchange, cultural collaboration, and joint exploration projects. Humanity offered to share their research in fields where they had made unexpected progress, while expressing genuine enthusiasm for learning from Vorthak achievements in areas where Earth's knowledge was limited. But the most devastating part of humanity's message was its conclusion. "We believe that the galaxy is vast enough for cooperation rather than conquest, and we hope that your species might consider the possibility that some things, friendship, discovery, the joy of learning about other ways of thinking and living, might be more valuable than simple territorial expansion. Admiral Krexval found himself staring at a tactical situation that had no precedent in military history. His invasion fleet had encountered not resistance or submission, but an offer of genuine partnership from a species that seemed to view the arrival of superior military force as an opportunity for making new friends and learning new things. The psychological impact on his forces was extraordinary. Vorthak military personnel, trained for efficient conquest and optimized for logical tactical thinking, were discovering emotions they didn't have words for. Several landing teams were reporting that they were beginning to feel guilt about the invasion. Others were expressing genuine curiosity about human culture and asking for permission to accept invitations to local events. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving individual messages from human civilians addressed to specific members of our forces. They're thanking us for visiting Earth, expressing hope that we'll enjoy our stay, and asking whether we'd like to exchange personal stories and cultural experiences." The Vorthak Collective's invasion fleet was experiencing something unprecedented in galactic military history. A successful conquest being defeated not by superior force or tactical brilliance, but by the simple refusal of the conquered species to accept the fundamental premise that different civilizations had to be enemies. "Sir," the tactical coordinator announced, "I'm receiving reports from all landing zones that our personnel are..." "Sir, they're beginning to request extended shore leave to participate in human cultural activities." Admiral Krexval realized that he was facing a strategic situation that his military training had never prepared him for. His invasion fleet was being defeated by kindness, his tactical superiority was being neutralized by genuine hospitality, and his conquest objectives were being rendered irrelevant by an enemy that refused to be conquered and instead insisted on being friends. 3 days later, the Vorthak invasion fleet departed Earth's solar system, but not in the way that anyone, including Earth's defense strategists, had expected. Instead of retreating in defeat or advancing to complete their conquest, they left as the advanced diplomatic mission for what would become the galaxy's first voluntary interspecies cultural exchange program. Admiral Krexval's final report to the Vorthak Collective High Command became legendary in galactic military circles, though not for the reasons that military reports usually achieve legendary status. Mission status. Objective parameters require fundamental revision. Earth's human population has demonstrated defensive capabilities that do not conform to known tactical paradigms. Recommend immediate reclassification from conquest target to diplomatic priority. Personal note: the humans make excellent coffee, and I have accepted an invitation to return for something called a cultural festival next standard galactic month. They are teaching me to play a strategic game called chess, which, despite their primitive technology, demonstrates remarkable psychological complexity. The Galactic Tribunal's emergency session, convened to analyze the unprecedented failure of the Vorthak invasion, produced conclusions that fundamentally altered galactic civilization's approach to interspecies relations. Dr. Miranda Chen's address to the assembled representatives became required study material in diplomatic academies across 17 star systems. The Terran Chaos Protocol was never about military strategy in the traditional sense. It was based on the recognition that true strength lies not in the ability to defeat others, but in the ability to transform potential enemies into actual friends. We weaponized humanity's greatest strength, our stubborn refusal to accept that conflict is inevitable between different ways of thinking and living. The aftermath of what became known as the Earth incident rippled through galactic civilization in ways that military strategists were still analyzing decades later. Several advanced species began incorporating cultural exchange protocols into their diplomatic procedures. The concept of aggressive friendliness became a recognized field of study in interspecies psychology, and most remarkably, the Vorthak Collective disbanded their conquest fleets entirely, transforming their military forces into exploration and cultural exchange missions. But perhaps the most significant change was the gradual recognition throughout galactic civilization that technological advancement and tactical superiority, while impressive, were no match for species that had mastered the art of seeing potential friends where others saw only enemies or resources to be exploited. Earth's defense plan had succeeded not by defeating the Vorthak invasion, but by making the very concept of invasion irrelevant. In a galaxy full of species that had optimized their civilizations for efficiency, logic, and strategic superiority, humanity had achieved something unprecedented. They had optimized for happiness, curiosity, and the radical belief that the universe was more interesting when different ways of thinking and living were celebrated rather than conquered. The final irony, noted by observers across the galaxy, was that Earth's primitive approach to interspecies relations had accomplished something that thousands of years of advanced galactic civilization had failed to achieve: a sustainable model for cooperation between different forms of intelligent life that was based on mutual respect rather than military superiority. And if that wasn't the most human thing imaginable, accidentally revolutionizing galactic civilization by refusing to accept that making friends was impossible, then nothing was.